and get like I'm curious if you could. These are all interesting. I'd love if you could kind of start by elaborating on them, and I'll add my 2 cents if that works for you.
Yeah, sure. Let's do that. Do you want me to start, or would you prefer to start?
Yeah, I'll start with with the first one, right? So if you're at a company, if you start a family, you'll be in a position to have ideas, you say, or you quote someone anonymously. Put yourself in a position to viscerally feel problems that matter to other people at scale. I'm curious, I guess, like has On Deck helped you with this? Like, what is kind of the origin story of On Deck, as a startup idea, and then also, yeah, like what have you kind of learned through that process? You see a ton of people, hundreds of people, you know, sort of go through this. You know, I'm curious what you've learned.
Yeah, on deck right now is trying to be, Stanford for the internet. Take the same bundle that is the university, the credential, the education, the network, and apply it to someone's entire career. But that's on deck. 5 years in, when on deck first started, it was a community for people who were looking to start or join their next company, and that was informed by my time at Product Hunt, just really sort of immersing myself in the startup ecosystem. I would just talk to all these really talented people at all these amazing companies, and it is everyone is looking for the next thing. It's like it's one big Ashley Madison for in the employee. I'm teasing, but hey, everyone's always like, what's the next thing? Even if they've just joined a company, they're like, 6 months from now, a year from now, I want to start something, or I'm always open. And there's this sort of like asymmetry between, like, employees aren't able to look in the same way that other people are, and so I just started hosting these events, and they just started getting bigger, and there was just momentum where there's just this underserved community of people who are looking for the next thing, but because they weren't super well networked, or didn't have big brands or whatever, they just didn't have this like positive serendipity that they could easily access. And so that was the inspiration behind On Deck.
Interesting. Yeah, it's like there's a whole set of problems that I feel like are like post college problems. Like they're
Yeah.
things that are phenomenal in college. No one has a problem, and then you become an adult, and you're like, wow, life is hard. Like I don't know how to make friends. I don't
Yeah.
like there's all of these things like the Friday night problem, right? The
Yeah.
Tinder problem. Like there are all of these things that you're like, oh wow, like the density that you get at college is just really really kind of singular, which I think is kind of interesting in COVID times because even that kind of goes away. I mean that is a really great framework I think for startup ideas is it's creating liquidity, right? Like Clubhouse is a great example
Yeah.
of this. But figuring out what do people want, that they don't know each other, they just need to be connected.
Yeah.
And you started with these dinners, but certainly On Deck is kind of a scaled version of that. And like there are so many businesses that are just connecting two people or two
Yeah.
sets of people, right? But fundamentally, every single marketplace is one of these.
Did you have you told the story? If it's old hat to everybody, we can move on. But about how you started Gumroad, because that I felt like you were really ahead of the curve there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm happy to tell the story again. Like I was full time at Pinterest. This was my Friday night problem.
Yeah.
I was living in Mountain View. Didn't know how to drive a car, so every Friday night I'd go home and I'd work on some project. And this time I was working on learning photorealistic icon design. So I designed this pencil, and I wanted to sell it. I had 3,000 Twitter followers I think at the time, and I was like I should be able to do this, right? If I wanted to give it away for free, that would have been easy. I would have just used Dropbox or Bitly or put on my FTP server or whatever. But the minute I wanted to say like this is a dollar, right? Like the friction isn't actually in the price; it's in the credit card processing. And this is like before Stripe launched. And I think the big insight I had there was like I wanted to. Normally, the order of operations was like you start using the internet, you have a website, you use the website to build an audience, and then if you want to sell something, you put like a big PayPal button on your website, right? Using eJunkie or something like that. Whereas now I was like, people had audiences before they even built the website, which was like a very different thing. So you wanted to sell stuff without a website, and that was kind of the problem that I wanted to solve for myself at first. Was like, I just want a Bitly, but a credit card form on top of that. And so that was like the first sort of prototype of Gumroad, was just Bitly plus a credit card form. John from Stripe gave me a Stripe beta key, so I was able to kind of build this thing up that weekend. I was designing the icon Friday night. Basically, Saturday, Sunday was just building Gumroad. It's actually open source, so if anyone wants to find it, you can Google Gumroad v1. I put the source code on GitHub. It's literally a single Python file. But it worked. It did the thing. It allowed you to like create a link, say, hey, I want to redirect people to this end destination URL. It costs $5 or $1 or whatever. You go to that short link, you enter in your credit card information, and then it just redirects. And that was kind of like V1. This is, we didn't know what the word creator was back then. Now, obviously, creator economy is kind of booming. So yeah, a little bit ahead of the curve. But I think the key thing and the key trend, which is still playing out today, is sort of this whole institutions to individuals, right, kind of thing, where like people are able to build their own audiences, and that is fundamentally altering basically everything. And that sort of informs every single business that gets built today. Is like what can you basically allow? I mean, Square is a good example, I would say, of this, where they basically allowed SMBs to do things that only Starbucks was able to do, for example, right? So that's a lot of what I look for, is like, what can rich people or big businesses do that individuals should be able to do?
Yeah.
Presumably everything, right? Like, why not? And so then it's kind of like an inevitability thing, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of how Gumroad came to be. And now we're seeing this whole new shift, I feel like, in the creator economy around online learning. That's really where the I would say, if not the majority, sort of plurality of the creator economy is actually on education and upskilling and teaching people. Effectively, the core of the creator economy, in my view, is just like get people to quit their jobs. Like that's the big enemy. That's the gorilla that you want to punch in the face. That everyone's trying to punch in the face collectively, is just this idea of 9 to 5. Like that seems to be the kind of uniting force. Yeah. I don't really know if people even realize that, but I think, that is kind of like the big, I would say the big problem of our time, honestly. Like one of the largest ones.
And that's sort of where our startups converge, actually, in terms of like On Deck and Gumroad, in terms of like, we're interested in helping people like explore other options, meet other people that they could do things with. And you're sort of further in that funnel a little bit of like, or at the parallel, but in a different way, in terms of, helping people monetize, helping people build an audience, helping people, realize that this is something they can do.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I would say Gumroad definitely is like kind of in the earlier part of the life cycle, where you're like, hey, I want to do this. How do I, I'm super early. I have a Twitter account, a Clubhouse account, but how do I actually start building an audience and start making some money? And definitely On Deck is where I would actually love over time, over, sort of multi-decade horizon, like the problem of like helping people start businesses is something I'm really interested in. Because I think that's something that I would say Gumroad lacks in the sort of impact sphere. Like I just believe so strongly in owning equity of a business. I think business ownership is amazing, and luckily I could kind of get to enable that in my side hustle. But like Gumroad, like I really want to figure out, like, is there a way to like, and we're starting with the Gumroad crowdfund, actually. That's kind of one way to do it, but really at scale, right? Like how do I actually get creators to start businesses and raise money for those businesses from their communities? Because I think that's ultimately, I mean, you see this with Kanye and David Dobrik with Dispo, like creators who figure it out and get to scale. They're like, how do I build something, right?
Dude,
how do I be supply?
Dude, I remember like I want to say like 2017 or something. It was like almost New Year's, or maybe it was New Year's. I don't remember, the day after or something. And we got dinner at Pakwan or some Indian place in San Francisco, and we were actually talking about this exact thing, like startup ideas that help people like start companies. And we're like, what's broken? Like the legal stuff could be a lot, like all the stuff that's just broken. We're like, can people write? Can we automate code? It's like, what can we automate in terms of like getting startups off the ground? And this is sort of like full circle in terms of like, or the next framework, or just like in terms of young people, when they go to college or when they graduate, you mentioned it's the sort of Tinder problem, the Friday night problem, the pizza problem, and those problems are great. The only challenge is that like, everyone else, like so many people are working on them, and so it's harder to have something sort of genuinely novel or genuinely 10x. Although Clubhouse, it like God bless when you do have it, it's amazing. Whereas when you get experience working at Accenture or Chevron or at some other company, or starting your own like you did, you start to see just like how much shit is broken and should just be way better. And not that many people have that same access to that problem, and thus you have a better chance at being able to solve it.
Yeah. I mean, I think ultimately, if you want to build a business, you have to meet hundreds, if not thousands, of customers eventually, right? And I think that, and they all have to be like-minded in the sense that they have the same problem that they're all willing to pay for. Uh, and I think one of the best ways to meet a bunch of like-minded customers is to literally pick any problem, any business, and start. Because inherently,
Yeah.
very quickly, you will meet hundreds of other business owners, and you will realize that like being a business owner comes with a set of huge problems. And I think too many people spend time focused on consumer product ideas, right? Because that's the
Yeah.
stuff that you inevitably see, right? You see your iPhone and your mug and your all the D2C kind of stuff that you buy. But the vast majority of businesses are B2B businesses, right? Like you buy an iPhone from one consumer product company, but there's thousands and thousands of, I think between 6 and 9,000. I don't know anyone actually even knows, right? So, but in the
Yeah.
thousands of businesses are contributing to making all of the little parts and all providing all the different software services to actually like make your iPhone real. But so I think starting a business is a great way to learn about all these other businesses that you're like, wait, I have to pay for like 50 different things to make this thing work.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's like a really great one. Like go work anywhere. Like if you work at any employer, I like to joke with friends like anytime they want to quit their job, I'm like literally just automate what you do. Like turn your job into a
Yeah.
company, and then go to your company and say, hey, the thing that you were paying me X amount for, you can now pay me X divided by
Yeah.
10 for. And you don't have to worry about any liability or anything. Like I really think, I mean, this is like Clearbit, right? Clearbit kind of like
That's
came
great.
out of Stripe,
Yeah.
and I presume because they were doing something internally around matching emails to companies or what have you, and it's like this should totally be spun out as a different company. And I noticed this when you talk to people like Patrick or anyone who runs some of these companies at this scale, like literally they can just rattle off
Yeah.
ideas all day long. They're like, this thing's
Yeah.
broken. This thing we spend too much money on. This thing requires too many people. This person we had to bring on as an expert. Like literally none of this stuff you can do unless you're at a certain scale, which is all ripe for democratization and
Yeah.
problem solving.
One related framework I have is when they go high, you go boring, in the sense of picking something so boring that other people just won't do it. And somebody like something. My best friend or one of my runs a packaging company, or builds software for packaging. It's so boring, my eyes start to water when I hear about it. But she just absolutely loves it, and thus like after a couple years, if has become a world expert at it. Whereas like you're trying to the consumer social, like it's so exciting that you're competing with so many more people, and so there are lots of things like packaging that are so boring that if you just spent a few years on it, you could be one of the biggest experts that there is, and that's an arbitrage.
Yeah, totally. No, that's exactly right. I think boring is key. I think
Yeah.
the more boring, the less competition, higher your chance that you're going to win. Because like I think it's better to assume you're closer to the mean than the smartest person on planet Earth, right? Like it's better to just assume that you're going to get a statistically likely outcome. So minimize your competition, and that's I would say boring is one, and then hard is another, right? Like if you can
Yeah.
find something that's kind of hard, but for whatever reason you are pretty well versed in that, you can figure it
Yeah.
out. Maybe someone who's worked on it for a long time. There are totally startups that get built because it's like someone with deep domain knowledge meets a product CEO, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, cool, I'll just productize you. Like I'm gonna take all of your insights, help you build a SaaS product around it, and then we're gonna go sell that. And that is how like lots of companies, a lot of sort of data infrastructure kind of companies get built that way.
Yeah. And just to your point about not competing, I'm really big on that. This line of like, don't enter the rat race unless you're the fastest rat. And so like, I was never this, A+ student that would just like, beat everybody in everything, especially when it was like, a clear outline. And so I'm looking for things in which I can get like A- or B+, and like no one else is even competing or no one else is even like getting numbers on the board, or that's like good enough to be the best in whatever that niche is, or that combination of things. I think part of it is just knowing yourself in how you operate. And like if you are the A+ student, then sure, but make sure you're the best at it, and just know that the bar is that much higher if you are taking something that is competitive. And On Deck is a little bit competitive, but I did like it's a little bit rat racy. But I did spend 3 years at Product Hunt, Yeah, and that felt like a real unfair advantage in terms of that like customer
Did you
set.
have other ideas that you were kind of playing with at the same time that you decided sort
Yeah,
of to push to the side?
it's interesting. Mark said the other day in Mark and Jason in one of his Clubhouse chats, he said something like, anytime someone pursues an idea that works, usually they've been thinking about that idea or variations of that idea for many years before. And I kept circling around like the same. Well, first, let me just take a quick detour. My first idea was Wrapped FM, RIP, which was like, chat roulette for rap battles on the internet. And that, didn't work out. Of course, Facebook a decade later just releases a rap battle app, no call from Zuck, no check-in, no nothing. The audacity. But so that was a bad idea, and it didn't really leverage like my core strengths or it was fun for me. But I learned after that, like, hey, I can, my hobbies can be hobbies. They don't have to be like the thing that make a business. And I actually enjoyed a lot more working with entrepreneurs. And so and building communities for entrepreneurs instead of musicians. And so at Product Hunt, I sort of like all my ideas after that were still in the same space. Like I'd started this thing called the Rise Awards, I think in 2016. I never really got it off the ground, but it was basically on deck for X in terms of what On Deck is doing right now in terms of going through different categories. So and even I like in 2014 when I started Product Hunt, on the side I launched this community called Ship, where it was trying to get a bunch of engineers together. So I kept circling around these different ideas around talent, around recruiting, around investing, and new ways of just sort of like bringing people together and building networks and connecting them.
Interesting. Yeah, that happens a lot, right? Where you look back, like you start a company, you finally find some success, and then like you look back and you're like, wow, I actually had this idea like 10 years ago. Like
Yes,
I
absolutely.
noticed like with Gumroad, it was like the same thing where I realized like I actually wanted, when I was making iPhone apps like a few years before that, I wanted to sell the source code. Like that's how I wanted to have these sort of this freemium model where I would give away all my apps for free. That would drive traction, and then I thought there was going to be just like this this like crazy wave of people who wanted to learn iOS development. So I would just sell the source code, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't figure it out. I was like, I don't know how to sell stuff on the internet. This is hard. So yeah, that happens very frequently where like just making it easier to sell stuff is like a pretty simple mission. Democratization generally. So yeah, that's really interesting. Jacob, welcome to the stage.
Hey, thanks, man. I'm nervous. This is my first time talking on Clubhouse.
Oh,
Welcome.
it's a trip. I think you'll like it. I think
Do I have to do
you'll really
anything or
like it.
just talk?
You just have to talk. Yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts? How do you? I mean, you've had quite a few startup ideas. Vimeo is one of them. So I guess I'd love to know how you came up with the idea for Vimeo and just generally. I mean, you have crazy
Yeah,
ideas. So I don't know if you should
yeah.
copy you, but I'd love to know your framework, quote unquote, even if you have one.
Yeah, I mean, I think Vimeo is the most relevant to talk about because it's by far the most successful. And also it's about to go public. And it's in line with what I heard you guys talking about just a minute ago, which was there had been a number of things that I did leading up to it that were like prototypes or like variants of it. So it like the way that it fits into the narrative of my life is like pretty essential. Like I was doing filmmaking from a very young age. I mean, I wouldn't call it filmmaking. I had access to a video camera when I was like 8, and I would like put it on a tripod and hook it up to the TV and film myself, make little stop motion effects videos. And that's like the late 80s. And then by the time I'm graduating from high school, like they just came out with these digital video cameras. It was called Sony Firewire was the technology, or sorry, yeah, it was the first Firewire cameras, and Sony had the first ones. I think they might have called it something else, but anyway, now you could just connect video cameras right to your computer. And so that's when I started doing digital editing, putting it on my own website. I had this website, blumpy.org, that was like my weird short films. Then I got in touch with the College Humor guys who just started College Humor, started putting my work on College Humor and then working on College Humor as a programmer. And then a couple of years later, I bought one of the first cameras that recorded right to SD card, so it wasn't onto tape anymore. So now it's like I was shooting these tiny video clips like all day long, and just wanted to upload them to my personal website, blumpy.org. So I made like a form on blumpy.org where I could upload these little video clips and people could watch them, and it would like kind of edit them and play them back. And I was like, this should just be its own site. So then I took it from this like subsection of my personal site to Vimeo, launched it as a single user thing. And then a month or two in, I was like trying to turn it into something bigger. And I recruited my partner, Zach Klein, who was a partner of mine on College Humor. And then he joined and we made Vimeo into like a multi-user website. So it's like, it's definitely not the normal, like, oh, I had a startup idea and built it. It was like just part of the filmmaking side of my life, like step by step until suddenly we had a product.
That's interesting. Yeah, the single user to multi-user is kind of an interesting transition. So you built it for yourself. It reminds me of the Derek Sivers actually with CD Baby. It was like kind of a similar thing, right? Where he just wanted to do it himself, and then his friends were like, "Can you do it for me?" And
right,
before you know it, you're like, "Damn, I have a business."
Yeah, and
to run.
Exactly, and yeah, in both cases, it's distribution. He was distributing music. He's a musician distributing music, and I was a filmmaker distributing films. And I think what's cool about Vimeo today, like even though they're now targeting enterprise customers, it's a SaaS thing. It still serves the same initial purpose I built it for in 2004. I've got these videos. I want to get them on the internet so people can see them. It's like, in retrospect, an age-old problem. It was like it had to happen eventually. And then, I did it, and now it's still around somehow.
Yeah, it's doing great, actually. I feel like the SaaS pivot has been working out really well for them.
Yeah, I think I think the IPO was hastened because during COVID, so much stuff has gone virtual. It's like not just Zoom meetings, but stuff gets recorded and needs to be shared. Like there's just a greater need for people to, get videos onto the internet now.
What is there? Are there things
away.
like happening now, like that maybe are reminiscent of that time in terms of like how many people were becoming filmmakers, or like do you see other, I don't know, other sort of types of creators where you're like, maybe there's another CD Baby or Vimeo here, like I don't know, a place for distributing Clubhouse bootlegs or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty medium dependent. I had a friend who used to joke that like every mime type gets its own service, and it's like, audio recordings. I mean, looking at Odeo, the precursor or the like sort of parent company to Twitter, they were doing podcasts. Flickr was doing photos. I think each type of thing gets its own form of distribution. Like I got my Nintendo Switch, and there's like the store on the Switch for getting Switch games. So I think we should look at the emergence of new forms of media. It's like transferring assets and rendering it like a video game. So you're going to have to come up with a new way to get that new content. And I think if people can come up with new forms of media, then yeah, they're invariably going to have to be startups based around moving that media around. And that's distribution. That was my family business as a kid growing up, music and video distribution. And as long as there's stuff, there's going to be people moving that stuff around. So there's always going to be opportunities there. But I totally agree with what you were saying earlier about, starting with your own thing, solving your own problem, and then selling it back to your employer. There's a principle that I like to use. I call it the Muser Principle, M-U-S-E-R. Whenever I'm creating something, I like to have a muse in mind, a specific person whose use of that software inspires me to build it and causes me to focus the product design scope on one person, making something that one person would love. If it's not myself, it could be, a friend or someone I admire. And if I can make something that they actually want, that one person wants, then it's easy to scale it to 1,000 people or potentially 1 million. But if you start out saying, I'm going to make something that 1 million people want, I'm going to make something 1 billion people want, it's like, what do 1,000 people want? It's very hard to say. Like if you were to get them to order pizza together, like very hard to say. But if you talk to one person, they can easily tell you what they want. And if you order that for everyone, a lot of people are going to eat that pizza.
Yeah. I love that. One part of picking ideas is is also just sort of the market reality of who's already doing what you're doing. If you are going into a space where there's sort of a big gorilla, and I'm curious how any sort of.
But he's going to be putting video online someday, and this thing airs like before we get the beta out, and it airs on February 14th, 2005, and that's the day that YouTube.com domain was registered. So I don't know for a fact that they were watching the rocket boom. I mean, it's not crazy to think that they were. In any case, it was not strategically a good idea to just do press about the details of this breakthrough product when there were like plenty of people out there ready looking for ideas. But yeah, I mean, that was the mistake, is don't do a video pitching your startup idea when people can fucking copy it, because those guys never really told the story of how they came up with YouTube for real. They've told like 3 or 4 different stories. And none of them is, we just saw Jake Lodwick pitch it on Rocket Boom and thought it sounded like a great idea and just built it with more money than he had. Vimeo was underfunded early on, kind of like until after IAC acquired us, because we had College Humor making the bulk of our money. And so the parent company, which is called Connected Ventures, was not in the business of incubating stuff. And this caused a lot of problems because Vimeo had a lot of potential, but the funding was not coming from VCs. The funding was coming from College Humor revenue. And I mean, there should be a whole case study on, how difficult this was for us, because on one hand, we had excitement about how Vimeo could potentially turn into something big, but we also had concerns about doing so cannibalizing our existing business. College Humor was like doing pretty well at that point.
It's a lot of people steal ideas. I mean, I thought that Zuck came up with Facebook for a long time. Didn't realize he stole it.
Yeah,
It's pretty crazy how that happens.
yeah. It's one thing I've noticed about this industry is that people do it very shamelessly. It's kind of everywhere, and I would say, like, don't put it past your friends and peers to be honorable in giving credit for ideas. Like, there's the original Clubhouse. I don't know if that story's public yet. Or sorry, not Clubhouse. It was what was it? House Party. House Party. Yeah, House Party was a stolen product, and they settled out of court to keep it under the rug. But the guys who got famous for making House Party big had stolen the name and the concept, and even I think some of the branding from the creator of that app.
Yeah,
and
that's crazy. I mean, even culturally, it seems like there's been a shift too, right? Like, it seems like Twitter Spaces is like, I mean, I feel like 10 years ago you would have had to at least pretend, like you would have had to design it differently or something. Like now it's like ruthless. Like, we used to make fun of Rocket Internet, like the Germans copying us again, right? Like that was so like, socially unacceptable.
Look, this is our business model. We just build our own versions and put more money into them. And it was like, oh, come on, man, be a little creative. But I feel like the winning strategy, like the strategy that wins, is just copy someone else and then lie about it. And unfortunately, people don't really get called out for this.
Yeah, or if they do, it doesn't, they're too rich to hear. Like, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Capitalism is a ruthless sport.
Yeah.
Eric, next framework. Do you have another framework?
Yeah. Going back to, or this idea that, like, when you're young, you want to take more market risk, and when you're more seasoned, you want to take execution risk. And market risk, the idea, pick a market that's smaller, doesn't exist yet because it's less competitive, and execution risk, a market that exists but needs a 10x better solution. And the classic example here is all sort of the people in crypto in 2016, 2017, when it really popped. A lot of the people who were managing the funds or crypto funds were just in their early 20s, mid 20s, and they were people who were willing to take more risk. And I was like a little bit older than that, but not. I feel dumb for missing that, in the sense of when you're younger, you feel safer looking dumb because you just have you should, because you just have more swings at bat. You have less things going on for you. Otherwise, you don't have so much to lose. And so, yeah, I think especially when you're just starting out and you don't have a ton of advantages that you can, like take execution risk effectively. You want to take asymmetric risk, like on a market that, if it works out, could work out really big, and you can just have like a B+ effort and it still be really meaningful because not that many other people are pursuing it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I would totally agree with that. Like, I feel like I was a market risk person when I was getting started. You also have like just the upside is so much larger, right? And then you realize you don't need that much success. Like I think sort of maximizing your success rate is actually like I'm glad for it. Like I'm
Yeah.
I'm glad that people take those risks. And I would again if I was 18 again, but like things change and they change quite quickly. I
I
think.
mean, Pinterest was a risk, right? Like that didn't look obvious.
Yeah, it was definitely, yeah. I mean, consumer social generally, right? Like the more that you rely on your users selling the product for you to other users, like the more beta it is, right? Because you're not in charge, you're not in control. Like you're not really in control of what, how they are going to tell other people about the product, how they use it too, right? Like that's another big market risk is like they might even use your product, but then they use it in a way that you don't really want them to use it, and then all of a sudden, like you can't really escape that
Yeah.
definition. Like I use the example of like messaging. Like I can send you a message on like 50 different platforms, but each one has its own little different social context, social cues that come with it, right? Posting on your Facebook wall, send you a text, like, and you can't really control a lot of that. And then yeah, execution risk is way more manageable. It's really stuff that's relatively in your control, generally B2B, where relationships matter and things like that. Like yeah, Pinterest definitely was in that sort of market risk category. Those outcomes are like crazy, but very, 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 very rare. Like it's much harder to yeah, like it's basically stupid, to be honest. Like
Yeah.
even Paul from Clubhouse was like, yeah, it's kind of stupid. That, like you work on consumer social for 10, 15 years, like
Yeah.
you might even like even 5 startups in, like your statistical odds are not
Yeah.
super great.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So, I mean, another framework related to Clubhouse is this is what by Ev Williams. It's take a human desire, preferably one that has been around for a really long time, identify the desire, and use modern technology to take out steps. And what Clubhouse does, it's sort of like the sort of late night dorm room conversation, or just like the water cooler, or just like at a party, or just sort of at a conference, or just sort of like bullshitting, and it just puts it like one touch, and you could have it. And it's funny. I mean, this didn't exist like 9 months ago, and now can't imagine like life without it. Like it's just so crazy how that works.
Yeah, I say something similar. I say like ancient human need, new technology, modern
Yeah.
new technology, right? Like what technology is new that basically allows you to do something that we've been wanting to do for a long time, hang around the campfire with our friends, and do it in a totally new way. I mean, and it's stuff that doesn't. I mean, we don't. I feel like I almost take Clubhouse for granted these days. But like
Yeah.
like we can have a conversation effectively in real time, but like we're scattered around the world. Like it's pretty, or we certainly could be. Like it's pretty crazy.
Yeah. I actually have an idea I want to propose to the audience. Someone should go do this. Some people are doing it in their own way. Um, and it relies on this sort of ancient desire. So the working name for the idea is prove you're a hipster. And the ancient desire is to discover things first, discover an artist, a movement, a meme, whatever, an idea, and get credit for it both from a reputational and economic way. And right now, I think that's so undiscovered, with basically everything that like on any site or any blog or any sort of thing that has a following. We don't know who the early people were, unless they put it on their Twitter bio, or unless they tell you, which they will. But I think it's sort of this a new template where you could just easily make it so that you can find out who was early as a result of it, and they should get the status benefits from that, and economic. They should be able to speculate on anything, and with the belief that other people will follow, and that's why you see microcosms of that with crypto, and sort of related crypto like things. But I think there's just so much more potential for that.
Eric, I have to ask, do you have a muse for that idea?
Do I have a muse?
Is there a person who you're inspired to build that for because you want them to use it? Like, is it for yourself?
Yeah, myself. Yeah. So I love, for
well,
example,
I think you're cool.
Yeah. I mean, not that I need to prove that I'm cool, but I have a podcast, and I love when I'm the first person to have someone on my show, like it just feels, I was at Product Hunt. I like discovering things early. Like it's just, it's an innate behavior. Now you're making me question whether it's part of a deep-seated insecurity. But it's
Hey.
no,
That's startup idea framework right there.
exactly. Yeah, take deep needs insecurity. Yeah, perfect.
I really liked thinking about the term asymmetric and just the advantages someone might have when they're starting out. And for some reason, the MakerBot story came to mind. That's something I happen to kind of have a front row seat to MakerBot. It's like the first consumer 3D printing company. And it was started by a couple guys out of, that were based in Brooklyn, including someone named Zach Smith, who had worked for me at Vimeo. And he was involved in this precursor to MakerBot called RepRap. And he was like talking about it for like years before they started MakerBot. He's like, it's a machine that can print plastic parts, and it is itself made out of these plastic parts, so it can make copies of itself. And I was like, that is the craziest shit I've ever heard. It sounds like some sort of Darwinian, like take over the world type robot, just making copies of itself. But, the idea was that anybody who wanted to make objects would have the ability to do it. And these guys, they worked on it as an open source thing for years. And then finally they came to me, we're like, Jake, we're ready to start this thing as an actual startup. And I gave him cash and office space and watched him launch it. And it's like, they didn't have any competitors. And I feel like this is such an important thing. It's like, you don't want to be like competing when you're a startup, but weirdly, there's a lot of like ideas that are like ready to pop. And like, there might be a subculture of maybe only 1,000 people who are into this thing. But if you can build a business there and serve those people before anyone really catches on that this is like a larger trend, like you're part of the reason it becomes a larger trend, then you have this crazy advantage. Like those guys didn't need to like raise a bunch of money for marketing, for example. They just put they made the product and put it online, and people started buying it, and they had sold their inventory 10 times over. They took the initial $75,000 investment, and they'd have gotten up to $750K in revenue just from selling these things to the like 5,000 people on the planet who cared. And it's like, it just wasn't a David and Goliath story. It wasn't like I don't know what you call it, like a Hunger Games type free for all. Like there was this period of a couple of years where anybody could have started the first consumer 3D printer company. Back to Vimeo, which, it's like I needed to distribute my films. Like, why hadn't anyone made a Flickr for video yet? I don't know. And it's like, there are these little windows where it's like technologically it's possible, but like no one has done it yet. And like, if you can identify that opportunity, because like you're one of those people, you can have such an easy time just becoming like
you
the
also
number
know
one name
who
in
your
the space.
who your customers are, and they're like chomping at the bit. And often I feel like before you have the product to sell, you've spent months like building these relationships, right? So you're not like some anonymous person selling your product to these people. Like you're someone who can speak the lingo, and like they know who you are. So
Yeah,
I
you're
wonder
like
if there's
in
like
this
almost like a
subculture.
limit, there's some like number of like when a subculture gets to like 5,000 people, it's like kind of on the verge of becoming really big, and it's like that if you're one of those 5,000, nobody else knows, and that's
Right.
sort of the right time to actually build stuff, because by the time there's
Right.
5 million people, it's too late.
Yeah,
Generally.
then there's people who are just like, let's get involved. There's like some new gold rush. Let's go, guys. But yeah, in the 5,000 level, it's mostly people who are just doing it for fun, like Homebrew Computer Club and that,
Exactly.
the pre-Apple days. Yeah.
Felix, welcome to the stage. I'm going to
Sahil.
invite some other people and see if people have questions or their own ideas they need help with.
I have two frameworks I want to mention and hear what you guys think about them. I used to give these as frameworks to think through ideas before I started my startup. So first one is luxury versus need. I think that when evaluating a startup idea, sometimes I've seen founders misinterpret an idea in terms of a luxury versus need. So the simplest example I have is Uber in the US versus Uber in other markets. So when you're building Uber in the US or ride-hailing company in the US, you have a market that a lot of people have that disposable income to actually, take taxis or cabs, and so you're just switching them from one thing they were doing to the other. When you build the same ride-hailing company in other markets, say in Africa or developing nations and things like that, and cities, you have a market where people were not necessarily inherently in mass taking cabs. They were using some other means of transport, and so the Uber is really a luxury there. And so your business model really switches up in that sense, in terms of whether it would work or it wouldn't work. And having that clarity when you're starting is key, because you're going to target the same investors and things like that. So that's one framework of a luxury versus need, and just being clear, because I think that it frames, or it shapes who you target and how you assess your market size and things like that. From 1 billion people to maybe the luxury space, which might be, maybe 200 million people or something like that. So that's one framework. I want to hear what you guys think. I'll throw the other one out and then turn it over to you, Sahil and Erik, and the host, to sort of give your thoughts. The other one is about an equation, and I may not have it perfectly right, but the way I would put it is the value has to be greater than the friction, and of an idea, if you want to start a startup. And in this equation, I had read somewhere about the paperclip, that it had been around for an exaggerated time, like 1,000 years. Paperclip has been around for 1,000 years, just random number, a long time. But no one has really gotten rid of it, because there's not a better way to do what a paperclip does. And the business idea that sort of fits into that realm is the business card. People hate business cards. Many startups have been built to try and replace a business card, but inherently the value of a digital business card does not exceed the friction that it takes to have a digital business card. So business card startups, you have to download an app, fill this app, and then it only works if the other person also has the app. And you have this catch-22 where the other person most of the time doesn't have the app, and so there's a lot of friction there, and it's just much easier to just have your physical business card, as traditional as it is, and give it to someone. For the world that uses business cards, I'm aware that most of Silicon Valley doesn't use that, but so yeah, those are the two frameworks. I just want to throw them out there and let you guys chime in.
I appreciate that, Felix. I don't have a direct comment, but it reminds me of another one that I heard recently, which was for consumer social particularly, and it was basically, if you boil it down, what consumer social things either do is help me make friends or help me get famous.
Right.
And if you look at the famous one and you apply it across medium, for text, we have Twitter, audio, now we have Clubhouse, photos, Instagram, videos, TikTok. They're like there's only like one big one for each. Although, of course, we could, add YouTube and Vimeo, different ones. But the make friends one are way more competitive. And I thought that was an interesting consumer social framework. Yeah.
I think similar. It's simple framework, and kind of, if you nail it at the beginning, if you're real with yourself when you're trying to build something in a space, then you can really, cut all the BS and focus on the things that matter.
I thought the need versus luxury is worth talking about in the Uber context. To give you some background, like my Uber story was, I lived in New York in 2006, and to get around in New York, you could take the subway, but if you want a car, you could either wait outside for a taxi, which usually took under a couple minutes, or you could call a car service and they'd say 5 minutes, and then they'd be at your door. And I went on a business trip to San Francisco for Vimeo, and one of our stops was Stumble Upon, the old link discovery site. And I was like, I called a taxi and it like kept not coming. And I was like, just kind of stranded on the street in San Francisco. So finally I get to the meeting, and I'm like, I was 15, maybe 30 minutes late to the meeting. And the CEO, Garrett, is there, Garrett Camp. And he's like, oh, no worries, man. It's so hard to get cars in this city. I want to make an app where you just open it up and hit a button and a car comes up. I was like, that sounds fucking great. And of course, he went on to create Uber. And no, I did not invest in it. But looking at it in terms of luxury versus need, I think is so crucial here. San Francisco residents needed a reliable way to get around.
Right.
And if they had tried to launch Uber in New York City, it wouldn't have worked. It would be too much of a luxury. Everyone would be like, we don't need something that's 5% easier than just calling a car and being here in 5 minutes reliably, or going outside and getting a taxi. And I think the important point here is people view Uber as having originally been a luxury service because it was luxury cars. But it was simply a high cost fulfillment of the need. I don't think it was actually a luxury. The ability to get any car to reliably pick you up in San Francisco in 2006, 2007 was like a superpower. And you think about cases where someone is like actually stranded, they might be unsafe, they just need to go to their job, whatever it is, and they're going to be like up to half an hour late because it's so unreliable. So yeah, I mean, Uber in San Francisco made it a habitable place for people who didn't own cars.
And we in my startup are in many ways we use similar frameworks and pretty close to that one, the luxury versus need, as we think of our strategy, and taking a larger share of the customer's wallet. Like, what else do they need that we already that is adjacent? There's so many things you can do, but which as you're prioritizing their needs, you try to think through, is this a luxury? Is it a need? Is it something that they'll die for if we fix that problem, type of thing. So it's not just for startup ideas as in new companies. I think it also works for existing companies in expanding and going for new markets. That's it.
I would say there are also businesses that turn luxuries into needs. I think that can also work. There are, for example, like if you get a ton of liquidity, like in the beginning of a social service, it might be a luxury to use, but when all of your friends are on it, it becomes a need, right? So there are also there are things that sort of transition from one category to the other. I think Uber also nailed. When you have a company that valuable, they often have nailed multiple business frameworks. They kind of, or idea frameworks. They kind of like multiply. But one of the other ones they nailed is like when the person who gets the value is not the one like paying for it necessarily, or like dealing with the cost. So for example, in like Uber's case, right, you have a lot of people who are like putting on the company card, and that is pretty great because you basically have like two different decisions being made, and each one is being maximized for Uber. Like you have the person who just cares about the value, and they're maximizing for that, and Uber can provide a phenomenal experience there, and then they have somebody else think about the cost.
Absolutely. And it wasn't too long before they became cheaper than cabs, and then it stopped being that much of a luxury, right?
Yeah, well, now it's a need, right? Because it's become an expectation of it's like how it's sort of an entitlement that we now have.
Yeah, and
the iPhone was definitely a luxury that is now a need.
Yeah, it's funny how these things looked when they first came out. I mean, the original iPhone was like clearly a status symbol in the beginning. I mean, one of my friends like said he got it to impress girls at the time, and it's become so popular. It's like it would be hard to either not have that or have an Android, which is a similar thing. And I think in the Uber case, you can see it in how they went from black cars. Like, I don't know if you guys remember, like the first Uber drivers in SF, they like wore suits and opened the door for you like you were a VIP. And now it's everywhere you go, there's Priuses, and it's just regular guys driving the car, and it's like you don't even expect that they're going to be like calling you sir or opening the door for you. It's just the basic need for point A to point B transport, like in everybody's hands. It's really amazing.
Cool small tidbit, and there's other people on the stage, so probably want to hear new frameworks. But in most developing nations, where you have Uber and ride-hailing apps, they're actually just cabs. They're not individual people with their own cars and things like that. Most of them, 90% of them are actually cabs that are working on Uber and whatever the ride-hailing app may be around.
I came in the middle, but one of my favorite frameworks is something that makes people look cool, make money or save money, or possibly save time, I guess. And if it can fit into one of those categories, it's usually a pretty good sign. Uber is a couple of them, actually.
Yeah, businesses that help people build businesses are great businesses. They're kind of like a positive sum Ponzi scheme or something. Like Stripe is a business that helps builds businesses. Shopify, Square, Gumroad, there are many of these that just like we're basically cloning factories, where we did something and now we want other people to do it. And so we're just building the software that enables people to become like us faster, cheaper, so more accessible.
I had a friend used to work for Bill Gates. He said that Bill Gates's quote was, "The best way to make money is to help other people make money." And Paul, I'm curious to hear if you think that concept applied when you guys were starting up Square.
Did we think whether or not we were helping other people make money? I'm not sure that exact phrase was ever uttered, but it probably was. There was a good 6 months at Square where we really didn't know what Square was for. Like for 2 months, we thought Square was going to be PayPal for Craigslist, in the same way that like PayPal was the way that people transferred money on eBay. We thought we were going to just allow people to transact on Craigslist, and like people were sending around links that like Craigslist is like 10 times bigger than eBay, but it turns out that there's like actual fraud problems with credit cards, and it turns out that most people actually want to not have to deal with fraud ever. So it made sense then we migrated to like, maybe we'll be like food trucks, and then maybe we'll be something else. But we talked a lot about virtuous cycles, which is basically like making someone else, succeed, and then you get to succeed because they're succeeding. So like one of the things that we never really talked about publicly because it was like, it didn't make sense from a marketing perspective, but like every single merchant who got on Square, we'd make sure we'd send them their money the same day that they earned it, which was riskier for us from a fraud perspective. And everyone else kept your money for 30 days. So like hypothetically, and I never actually verified this, but hypothetically the merchants would acknowledge that it was a much better experience and then tell their friends. Because the faster their cash flow is, the more inventory they can buy. More inventory they can buy, the more they can sell. And so hopefully their growth rate is bigger than they would be on the competitor, and then hopefully our growth rate is bigger because their growth rate is bigger. So a virtuous cycle, and making money because you make other people make money.
I mean, it's the single thing that basically everybody wants. I think everything else is arguable. I think making money and losing weight seem to be the two universals. Like, I mean, just look at New Year's resolutions, right? It's every year, make more money, lose weight.
I think a lot about how weight loss apps or like exercise apps are mostly just like marketing things. Like people show up and they buy something and then they just kind of like maybe use it. Like, I don't know, it's kind of off topic, but like, is Peloton going to see like a cliff at some point because people are like,
yeah, let's discuss Peloton, because I think it's a very interesting company, and it kind of violates some of these ideas. But it also, yeah, I think it would be a fun one. Like, is Peloton a luxury or a need? Like, did it start out as a need for a group of people, or did it start out as a luxury?
I think it's certainly a luxury, and it still is. And this is just opinion, but the reason I take that stance is because if you look at it from the entire market standpoint, so if you say the entire US population, and then you look at who is buying it, which segment is buying it, which segment are they targeting, I think just looking at for the people who are actually buying it, they may feel it's a need. But for me, when I was talking about the luxury versus need framework, I was looking at it from a market standpoint, like an entire population. Which segment of the market do you go for? Sure, the people who buy it may feel it's a need, but from a market standpoint, if most of the people who are buying it are rich and things like that, then my opinion is it ends up being a luxury.
I want to actually just talk about this a little bit. So I I was late to adopting the iPhone, and I was like the Android Motorola guy looking at everybody. I'm like, oh wow, okay, they're just like looking for this streamlined product, and whatever it may be. And I was a late adopter to SoulCycle and Peloton. I actually don't even own one. My wife bought one, and I'm looking at it, and I see my friends, and they're like, oh my god, this is like the best way to work out. It's like, it's just like it's a really well put together product. It makes it really easy for you to go from one workout to another. So I see it as very much like the iPhone of working out and fitness. So I don't know what you guys think about that. Just wanted to bring that up. And I'm
Do
a
you think it'll
complete,
become a
yeah.
necessity? Kind of like, how Sahil was talking about how the iPhone has become not, it's like not a luxury, it's a necessity now. Do you think Peloton will ever get to that level?
I would love Sahil and Eric's take and Jacob's take on it, and especially Jacob, because I feel like you're kind of you're the critical feedback type of person. But I do think that it is kind of it is the necessity. It's like the iPhone of working out. It's like if you want to do a 10-minute squat workout at home, which we're like all being bullied into, it's the way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly would consider exercise a need. And, I go to the gym and have my own schedule, and it's like requires tremendous, like I was doing it for a week and then I missed a week because I was pretty tired from work and I fell out of the loop. And it's like, I'm not just trying to lose weight, like I'm trying to gain strength. And the difference in how I feel, I mean, I feel like it's a secret weapon. Like if I'm getting enough sleep and I'm lifting weights, then like everything is going well in my life for sure. I can eat more hamburgers, which makes me happier. And I think however it works for somebody, um, it's like absolutely essential. I think that every person has some form of exercise. And yeah, I don't know, the luxury versus need thing. It's like I don't know how fundamental that is. I feel like Peloton, certainly the majority of the world would view it as a luxury item. And it may be that the most economically feasible way to get everybody fulfilling a basic need is to start with the high end. Whether it was back to Uber or the iPhone. I mean, the Tesla, they were very explicit about this strategy. I feel like, to me, the thing that I really want to know about a startup early on is just like, is there a core person or group of people who actually actively are excited about it? And like that might be a group of wealthy people who can spend thousands of dollars on things, or it could just be a group of teenagers who have no money, and they just want a new way to share content and like hang out with each other.
Where the luxury thing breaks down a little bit for me in the sense of, humans have a core need to be high status and higher status to other people in their sort of, milieu and in the network. And so they're willing to, if something effectively gives them higher status, they're willing to pay and put a lot of effort. And that's going to always or often look like a luxury.
Have you guys ever seen the Brian Chesky description of how to make Airbnb like a 10 out of 10 experience? It's in like a blog of some sort or a podcast, but I don't think it's been memeified like everywhere in the Silicon Valley yet, but I don't want to repeat it if it's like really common.
No, it's not. Go ahead.
Okay, so basically he has a design process, and the design process is trying to figure out like what the 10 out of 10 experience is. And so this person, I don't know who it was, but it was a man from, let's say, Cleveland. He comes to San Francisco. He does his San Francisco tour. He has all these like little like hiccups along the way. Like he gets to his Airbnb and the key isn't ready for his Airbnb, and so he's stuck outside for 45 minutes. Then he gets inside, and I don't know, the AC wasn't on or the heater was on or whatever it is, but lots of small things. Then he's in San Francisco and he doesn't know where to go or how to have the most fun. So he has like, a 3-day weekend or a 4-day weekend or whatever, and then gets home and it's like it was okay, but he went to San Francisco. So he checked the box that he thought that he wanted to do. So apparently they reached out to this guy and they're like, hey, can we redo your vacation? But we're gonna really curate it, and then we're gonna use it as a way of, setting a goalpost for what we want Airbnb to be. And so he's like, okay, gets in a plane, comes back to San Francisco. I think they actually met him at the airport. I'm filling this in from my memory and doing this like a little bit of an imaginary sort of version of it, but like you guys can go find the blog post. Find him at the airport, have a sign, bring him to the Airbnb, like unlock the front door for him, like get him in where he needs to be. Then they have a group of other people who are also visiting San Francisco. They've like acquired like information about all these people and they found out what their tastes are. So they're like, hey, you know, Stan, you might like meeting these people. These people also have similar interests. They also want to go to these type of things. Maybe you want to go to these type of things. Here's things that we've like figured out for you. He's tours. You can just like check a box. But it's this hypothetical like the perfect experience of like what you want, or like the Uber version where it's like you just push a button and then like this really amazing posh car with tons of space. Some guy comes out, he opens the door for you, lets you get into the car. He's wearing a suit because that makes you feel even fancier and look cooler. You get into the car, he takes you there, it's like super well conditioned. They give you a water bottle, which is like unheard of in a taxi experience. They're super nice. Credit card's taken care of. You don't have to deal with money, which is gross. But it is possible to design like a perfect experience where it's like, I don't know, what's the Peloton perfect experience? Have they done it? Are they like starting at that point and then slowly working down the way Tesla did?
Yeah, one thing that's interesting about Peloton is like it seems very hard to forecast their future. Like I don't really know what direction they're going in with what they've released so far, whereas with other companies like Apple, Tesla, like either they just explicitly say it or you can just get a sense from like their sort of innovation curve, like where they're going to be. And Peloton, maybe it's just because I don't know enough about it. Maybe someone wants to raise their hand who's a Peloton expert. Yeah, I don't have the same feeling for Peloton. I couldn't tell you like what's their next thing, you know.
People seem to rave about just their normal iPhone video workouts, which is kind of a low-end market thing compared to I don't know how much it costs, $2,000 bike that costs like another $100 a month or something. It might just be that they're carving off that niche of like, and once again, I haven't read the articles. I'm sure someone has written a much better analysis of this than I'm just coming up with right now, but there might just be like carving off that like niche of like the 1%ers who can afford like a dedicated room with a dedicated bike, and $100 a month is really nothing for them if it saves them any time.
How do you feel about Mirror, which is that kind of standalone workout mirror that lets you work out and kind of do things on your own, almost kind of like Peloton, but not quite.
I like that it embraces like different types of workouts. Like you can do hypothetically 10 different workouts as opposed to just a single bike. I also happen to like tonal a lot just because I think weightlifting seems to make people really happy, which is basically the Peloton for weightlifting.
Yeah, I feel like I'm way more bullish on those. But yeah, I still don't know where they're going to take that because I think there's kind of a limit to what you can do with like a bike and with a mirror. With a mirror, I think it's actually a lot more than you can do with a bike. So that's why I feel like it's just way more scalable, way more accessible by different people. But their price point is still very, very high, which we're going to have to see if they can bring it down to make it like more of a necessity and less of a luxury.
It also can go into almost any room, or at least a lot more rooms.
Yep.
I wonder if it would be interesting if some of the serial founders wanted to share stories of like startup ideas we had that seemed really promising and didn't work out. I think we talk a lot about the successes, but I'm guessing, you know, anyone up here who's had a successful startup has had a number of things that either failed startups or it didn't even get to the startup stage. They just had an idea, started building it, and then it didn't pan out. I don't know if I'm ready to talk about one yet. It's kind of embarrassing because we usually just talk about the successes, but I feel like there's probably a lot of really good lessons in the failures as well.
I think, Paul, what you said about how you saw Square in the very beginning, I worked on something very similar like 4 or 5 years ago, and it was basically going to be an app that let people pre-purchase what they wanted to buy from Craigslist and be able to like pay for it before you got there, and also have like video built into it so you can watch and see the product from the side of the seller. So the seller can hold up their phone, you know, do a video demo. This is before video became like super kind of accessible. And so we built out this entire like product, had like this whole video service that lets you stream live, kind of like when Periscope was blowing up. And we just realized it was like really hard to scale this marketplace, given that, you know, it just seems like Craigslist just works. And payments on Craigslist are just so fascinating to me because even today, you know, 30 years after it started, it's still working kind of like it did back in the day. So I find that market just so interesting and so untapped in terms of like, you know, it hasn't changed. And so that was one of my ideas that kind of resonated when you talked about like how you were building at Square and you thought it was going to be PayPal for Craigslist. I was like, I had the same thought process.
It sounded so smart to be PayPal for Craigslist. Everyone sounded smart. It's like there was so many like Craigslist is this enormous opportunity, and it turns out nobody wants that. If you look at the original Square marketing material, it's a lot of like selling your couch on Craigslist, which is absolutely ridiculous. Also, it's like there was an entire month where someone came into the office and convinced us all that food trucks was like the wave of the future. And like, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love food trucks, but it's like, it's not this like huge percentage of people's, you know, monthly spend. And it was just like the really, really cool thing that month. And so we stopped the entire team and we're going to build like this map so that you could like go to the Square website and there would just be a map and you could see where your food truck was. And it was like this unique opportunity because like Square could send the location the food truck was at. So it'd be the only map that was live and up to date. And obviously Jack has like, you know, Twitter experience. So he was like, well, they used to just post their location on Twitter and now they don't even have to. It's like one step less. So it was like everything was coming together, but we just built a bunch of maps and then we used them for internal dashboards instead.
Hey, Paul, this is Tom Goddard. I would attest to what you're saying. I think a lot of the things that Craigslist is doing are great. I guess it's maybe a little different than what you're saying, but I think there are just a lot of gaps in Craigslist that need to be filled. And that's why I started building out this classified platform. I was building an app called Instamotor with my buddy from college, and it grew very quickly. In 2015 we were getting like 9,000 app installs a week, because the Craigslist experience for buying vehicles just wasn't that great. Anyway, failed experiences, I would go back to like building a product I built with Starbucks in 2005, and Howard Schultz, the founder of Starbucks, and I was the architect on the solution for HP. And Howard came in, and he came into this Starbucks on the promenade, and I just met Hillary Swank. She came in, I didn't even know who she was. She just came up and she was using this thing that I built with my team for Starbucks for listening to music and then burning the music onto CDs in Santa Monica. It was like a one of the flagships pilots. And we had like EMI, we had Capitol Rec. I mean, we had all the major labels and through Hear Music. And Howard Schultz comes in. He's like, Tommy, I want you to tell me what's the great thing about having this, you know, CD burning in Starbucks. And I'm like, CD burning in Starbucks. Like what? Like here I am, you know, totally tech guy thinking like, it's a terrible idea to have CD burning, period. It's all going to be digital soon. And this is like right when iTunes was blowing up. But I thought about it and I'm like, you know, the best thing you can do is like build your own experience for the customers in Starbucks, which is now basically the Now Playing stations in Starbucks. So it's not such a terrible thing to have, you know, music and Now Playing in Starbucks. But, you know, having CD burning when that technology is being phased out, didn't seem like a great idea at the time, and certainly didn't go over well. I guess it didn't live very long. But you know, the idea of having Now Playing stations and discovering music, I think is still a great idea in music stores. But I think Craigslist kind of plays to that traditional classified platform very well, and it just has so many gaps. I don't know why. I mean, it has so much potential to really have like better maps, to have like augmented reality experiences, NFTs now, like everything on a blockchain possibly, and just so many cool things that I think are just missing. And I kind of like, I'm trying to build that out right now. And you probably, in with my bio, if you look at my bio, you can see I have like a million ideas around apps because the .app domain, I've been watching it since like Google announced that they were battling with Apple, and then Google won. And then I was just watching it for like 10 years. And then finally I found this like disclaimer in one of Google's privacy statements that they were having like an open release of .app domains like on May 5th, 2018, and closed domain release on May 1st. So I was like, oh, no one knows about this. So I bought a bunch of domains. And now I have all the ideas that I've ever wanted to create in my, now I'm like flooded with all of these projects that I really want to build. And I have friends over the years that have families and had exits and tons of exits. And I've been fortunate in some sense, but I've experienced losses, and Instamotor was sued by Craigslist, unfortunately, for 35 million and for scraping ads. And I was telling the founder like we shouldn't be scraping ads at the time.
Tom, that's really impressive. All the .app.
Good.
Holy crap, that's a lot of apps.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was going off.
No, I'm just looking at your profile. I didn't mean to. Yeah. Sorry, go. You talk, Lauren or Jennifer.
I came up here because I wanted to echo like Paul's. There was two questions. One on the Peloton question. It's becoming a subscription software service now instead of a bike company. I use it to like work out, and it sends you like running workouts, which you can just do on your phone. So that's what the future of Peloton might be. And then on experiences or companies that fail. I worked in deep tech for a while, and all the companies that I've seen fail focus on the project first and not the customer and not the experience, and they don't map out the experience. So you'll get like really fun projects. Like I had a friend who created a toe laser. So the idea was
I need one of those.
Thank you.
Wait, Paul, you've had a toe laser?
No, I haven't. I just really am enjoying this story.
Okay, so the idea is you'd it was like a tiny little laser that you would lay on the floor, and as you danced, it would like shine light over your toes. And it was really novel, and it was great for parties of like 15 nerds in San Francisco, and it had like a market of 100 people. But past that, it didn't like grow as a sustainable like business. But like you will get these projects that are fun, but like projects without experience, like mapping the experience of the user, usually don't scale.
When I was a kid, I always thought we'd have flying cars and toe lasers.
Yeah, right? Flying cars and toe lasers.
Halfway there.
Yeah,
I think they had a dream about a toe laser once. It was shooting neutrinos. That's actually how we're here. We have a toe laser under a blanket, and we're just a neutrino projection of ourselves.
Yeah, I guess what I also love seeing startup ideas like that are like sort of ridiculous, and then mapping them backwards to like figuring out would this be a useful like project.
I'm curious with the toe laser thing. I mean, did the team really like this thing to use themselves, or was it more like they just thought it sounded like a cool idea? Like, I'm curious, like how they saw the toe laser like entering society. I mean, was it just for San Francisco parties or something? People staring at their feet, or was there some larger vision?
It was cool and fun and novel. I don't think he was gonna save the world with toe lasers.
Yeah, but it's fair. I mean, I feel like as long as like someone is into it, it's worth building. Like, and this is obviously a luxury that engineers have if they're getting started, because they don't need the capital to do it. I think it can be really hard to tell. I mean, it's like toe laser does sound pretty silly, but like, what if it was like the most fun thing at a party? Like, they kind of had to build it in order to see. I mean, did they build it and start using it, and it just like kind of wasn't quite as fun as they expected?
It was fun. I think it's like similar to maybe like Airbnb, like having Cheerio boxes and getting marketing, getting users, but it's not like something you can scale long term. maybe that's the question. It's between like there's fun ideas with small user groups, like maybe toe lasers in San Francisco, and then there's startup ideas that you can like scale, and like how do you navigate the differences between the two? Isn't it really interesting question?
Yeah, I mean, it's like it could have been the next fidget spinner. I'd be curious to hear from the team. Like, did they, after it's over, were they like, yeah, we just really miscalculated the market. We had so much fun with this thing, but like, it just didn't catch on. I just feel like with a lot of these things, it's like I'll hear somebody pitching an idea, and it's kind of like, well, like just make it, like just build the thing and like have that be the pitch. And sometimes you do that, and it's like, you know, like when Tumblr launched, it was like in an hour, 600 people had set up Tumblr logs. But, you know, perhaps it would have actually, in an alternate reality, like nobody really needed the ability for like efficient blogging. And so it was just a thing that like a couple people in New York ever used. Sahil, do you have any failed startup stories you want to share?
I had a little app. One of the first apps I made for the iPhone was it allowed you to call a cab on your phone, and I built it for. I was living in Singapore at the time.
Oh shit!
So I built it for Singapore, and I charged money for it too. It was like $1.99, $2.99, and all it would do is it would just like, you know, like call a cab. Like I wasn't handling the payments or anything like that. So I would just charge. I think I charged $2.99 for the app. I think I was like 16. And I made like $3,000. Got in the local newspaper.
And
cool.
were you expecting it to keep growing?
I don't know. I don't think I had ambition. Like not even that I didn't have ambition. I didn't know what was possible. Like I didn't know that startups, you know, like at that point I thought that Microsoft and Facebook were like mythical corporations with supercomputers. You know, like just like the idea of like, oh wait, I can develop software with my current situation was just, even though I was doing it with the app, like it felt like a world apart.
And so did you find out
it took me until Hacker News and Y Combinator probably, you know, until I was like, holy wait, what, it's the same thing, like this is what happens.
Yeah.
I remember I thought Microsoft, because Microsoft invested in Facebook, and for some reason I thought like my Facebook was a Microsoft project. So like literally for years I would like try to convince everyone that like Facebook was like a Microsoft project. Very strange thing to, yeah.
And so presumably your taxi app was this pre-Uber?
Yeah, this was like 2000. I mean, maybe it wasn't even pre-Uber, to be honest. It was pre when I started using Uber. But it was 2008, 2009.
Mm-hmm. And so do you think in retrospect there was some key insight that you missed, or was it more like you were just a kid and you weren't really like thinking about it that clearly?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I would have, you know, sort of the execution is everything thing. Like I think I had the idea, like many people probably did, but like to do what Uber did to make their, you know, logistically, operationally, like just like I don't think I would have been sort of mentally capable of doing those sorts of things, you know, at that age. But I think I figured out. I mean, it showed that I got into that cycle of like solving my own problem, and like thousands of other people had that problem, and I got paid for it, you know. And so at least it kind of like triggered that cycle in my brain of like, oh shit, like make software for people on the internet. They give you money, you can do this again.
Right.
And again
And
and
is
again
that
and
what,
again and again. Yeah.
and with Gumroad, was there like an initial use case that was driving you on that?
Honestly, Gumroad was kind of stupid of me. Like, Eric, I asked you that question around, like, did you have other ideas? You know, sort of when you were besides On Deck, and for me, I did. Like, and when I was talking to investors, the first investor I met with, Heen Shaw, I was like, I have these two ideas. One is Gumroad, one is this thing called Data, which was a social network I wanted to build that was just about like sharing numerical data points with your friends and your graph, like anything, your weight or whatever, you know, any numerical data point, your net worth or whatever. And he was like, you have to pick an idea, dude. You can't just like pitch it. You can't get feedback on which company you want to start, you know. So I just literally just picked Gumroad. So I wish I had thought more deeply about the market and the opportunity. Not that I'm grateful that I didn't. Like, I'm grateful for the path, but certainly in the time, like, I didn't apply a lot of the rigor that I would apply today, for better or worse. Kind of like what Erik was saying. It's kind of like Gumroad is almost like a consumer social startup, where it's like maybe a startup better started by someone young and stupid. But I'm happy to run it today.
I
I
remember,
think of myself as like I've inherited
Yeah.
it from from a
Well, to
younger
take it full
different person.
circle, when you started it, it was market risk, and now that it's so it's so popular, and the space is so popular, now it's execution risk. You've completed the full cycle
Yeah,
with the same idea.
that's exactly right. And it's also, I think, going from luxury to need. It seems like
Yes.
I think the creator economy is, I think the big, I mean, 2020 is actually a really interesting thing, because this is actually what it did for a lot of things, right? Is like it took a bunch of things that were luxuries and said, hey, we need these things now, which inherently, means that there's way more demand for, companies to solve these problems, and like people will pay money.
Yeah, it's interesting, when you're early, like how much are you willing to wait? And because Todd Goldberg had a tweet the other day. He was like, I was really into NFTs in 2018, but it was too early, and of course now it's blowing up. And there's always that tension between, like, do you just wait a few more years, because that's what you effectively did with Gumroad, and now you came on the other side of that. But for other people, if you're like VR or something, like, you could be waiting a decade or more.
I think VR is going to catch on in the 2040s. Any decade now, it's going to be huge.
Exactly. Exactly.
VR and self-driving cars are like perpetually
Yeah.
10 years out or something.
But you could sell a self-driving car company for $1 billion plus. VR has been harder.
Sahil, there's someone, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name right. Sol Ema says she's a serial entrepreneur. I was wondering if is there a way I can invite her up, or do I not have that ability?
I just made you a moderator, and
oh, okay.
did the same to Erik.
This is so exciting. My first time inviting someone. This is really my first Clubhouse. Yeah, just invited her. Yeah, I'd love. I mean, I just think it's so valuable to hear from people who've been serial entrepreneurs. Just because I feel like there's always a personal story behind these startups. Like, there's something going on in someone's life, and it's like causing them to want to build this like unproven thing. And like, I think in a lot of cases the reasoning is pretty sound. And I'm so curious to figure out, like, is there a science of it? Like, how predictable could this stuff really be? Like, are there certain things where if you do them, you have a much better chance of catching on? And I think a lot is written about, operationally, like how companies scale once there's a team. But I'm so interested in like the seeds of things. Like, before it's even a company, there's this phase where it's usually like there's only like one or two, maybe three people around, and like often those stories, they're either lost, especially if the company doesn't make it, or they sort of get like absorbed into like a PR version of the story that gets told over and over. I don't know if you guys have experienced that, but almost every startup I know, there's like the story that they tell in one sentence in interviews, and then there's like the actual, like, much messier, usually longer story of how it came to be. I feel like this could be like a good forum if anybody has stories they want to talk about those weird sort of alchemical early days of startup success or failure.
On this thought, I think about this a lot because I've seen several startups go from like the garage to like public companies, and the thought on like the story of the startup in the garage versus like what is told on the public, I think it's just easier to remember the simple story that is a one-line PR statement about what the company does, and that's why you see this transformation between like the really like gritty, like random stories of like working in a garage until 4 a.m. versus like the log line of this company does X?
I think it's the trauma sometimes where you don't want to remember the iterations like you had to go through.
You don't want to
like,
remember you were up until 4 a.m.
right? Because I remember going through like I had a startup even before Octane with my friend Hillary Carls, who's now a developer over at Square, and we would just we had to iterate several times trying to figure out something that would actually stick, and then eventually it became Clout for Content. Well, if anyone ever remembers Clout, and then afterwards we were like, but this will be a social analytics company. That sounds horrible. Why would we do that? And then we quit. I guess my point being that I feel like startup ideas are just a constant set of tweaks and iterations. Only every once in a while is it close to the same thing that it was in the beginning. And we try to consistently tell the story of it's the same thing, and it's always been the idea, both for the PR and because it's traumatic experience evolving a startup idea and trying to find product market fit.
Yeah,
I've been around a lot of random startup people when they first started their company, and there's a couple of weird ones that were perfectly articulated. Like Stripe and Dropbox were so exactly what they did for 7 years almost. But there's other ones which were very, very different. Like Pinterest was a totally different beast when it first came out and iterated towards Pinterest. I can't even remember. Actually, Sahil, you should talk more about that. But it was originally a tote thing, which nobody talks anymore.
Yeah, Pinterest initially, just really quickly, Pinterest started out as a tote, and it was basically a offline to online version of catalogs. So the goal was to basically catalog the Macy's, IKEA, Restoration Hardware, etc. catalogs, and then you could browse it all on your phone. And they built a prototype of that. It was insanely difficult to upkeep, getting all this data, which I think it was quite manual at the time. Anyway, they built this thing. No one really used it, but the one feature that people used was this pinning, or not pinning at the time, saving functionality. Basically, they were bookmarking stuff, and so then the next thing they built was Pinterest to kind of just productize that, make a whole product around saving stuff. That is the Pinterest story. Ben had some stupid ideas before that company. he went through Ricey 3 times, and he's told me some of his ideas are pretty terrible.
He had an idea that was basically a Groupon before Groupon existed called Eat, Drink, Buy, Do. And every day it would send you 4 things for each one of those categories. And then Groupon showed up 2 years later and did exactly one thing, which is a much simpler version of it. And had the discount, which I think he had a discount too, but I can't remember what it was. But one of his big debates was can I, what order should Eat, Drink, Buy, Do be? Should it be buy, drink, eat, do? Or this is confusing.
Rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic.
Yeah, basically.
Soylent's still one of my favorites. Just the original idea was some kind of affordable network of radio, or I don't even know. And then it turned into replacement for food. And I think that was around the time they went into YC. And there was nothing the same between the two things.
It's interesting. I mean, Clubhouse before it was Clubhouse was Talk Show, which I think was just an app for people to record podcasts. I don't know if it was even live.
I think it was live. That was built into it, but yeah, it was it had all the scheduling components of a podcast.
For 2 weeks, there was a point where Zynga was making toolbars for Internet Explorer for every single Facebook app, and their rationalization was that Facebook apps had millions of users and toolbars made money, and if you just did that, you'd make money. And then they realized they should just make apps because that was where people were going anyways, and it was still growing rapidly.
I do find it interesting how certain entrepreneurs consistently go after the same kind of area idea, because Clubhouse is a perfect example of that, because before Clubhouse there was Highlight, which Paul started. If anyone ever tried Highlight and went to South by Southwest and was trying to solve some of the similar problems, connecting people closer, and it failed that time, and
clearly hasn't failed this time, but very interesting that he went for the same theme, trying to figure out the same kind of problem or problem area.
It's totally true. There's people that just follow this theme throughout their entire life. Like the Firefox guy made like that Firebug, and he's done it like 4 different times in various parts, but people just seem to get obsessed with an idea of some sort and just like repeat it every like 3 to 4 years until either it works or they do something else entirely.
I mean, this is definitely true in other professions, right? Like typically one person, like a musician chooses a genre of music and just sticks with it, or a painter has like a certain style. Like there is just like innately we are attracted to solving certain problems, and like we just do it. Like I noticed this with reading books, like fiction books often. Like it's like you realize you're reading the same book over and over again, and then the impressive thing becomes like, can I morph within the structure I'm going to stick with? Like, can I make it interesting?
I think, yeah, it's also worth looking at, in my mind, one of the clearest examples of that is Evan Williams, having created Blogger, Twitter, and Medium, which is, it's writing tools with like 3 different lengths in mind. And you got to think like somebody coming up with those 3 things, like there's probably a little more going on than like, oh, I have a new idea for something that could make money. Like that clearly seems to be coming from the more, maybe call it artistic or maybe call it personal or soulful side. And I think that can really lead into not only creating something that, at the very least you want to use, so you at least have, a muse, but, something that, a lot of other people could resonate with. And it's just really, I think it's worth looking at the startups that are created because the person is like, it's coming from a place deep inside. Like there's the idea for musicians that there's like 2 types of musicians. There's the people who want to be in a band, and there's the people who can't stop playing music. And I think probably for a lot of people, there is the thing that they find super interesting. And, if that lines up with product ideas, then they might have, 2 or 3 or 5 attempts at scratching some underlying itch.
Jacob, I unmuted myself. I raised my hand, and thank you for bringing me in. I am in an interesting stage. You mentioned the seed story, the soul spark, and it's kind of where I am. So if you want to catch some energy, I'm happy to deliver that. My seed is a bit unique. It came to me in 2011. I had read about these 2 engineers on a random message board that came together to develop a prosthetic arm for a girl who lived in a third part of the world, and they had read about her in like a newspaper article. And in 3 parts of the world, they virtually co-created an arm for this girl, changed her life. And a couple other things were hitting in my life at the time, and I was really starting to discover like what really matters, what I really care about, what I want to use the culmination of everything had been working on at the point for. And so it sort of hit as like a soul spark. And it was, shouldn't we just have like a Kickstarter for world problems, like where we could just collectively gather all of our resources, and not just money, but like ideas and overstock, and network alone is such a valuable resource. So that was 2011, and I played with the concept behind the scenes, and sort of like started other small companies in that time, and kind of went through my own processing. But in 2020, when this all hit and the world paused and it kind of recalibrated, and we kind of had to look at things differently, it was like, okay, it's time. It's time. The world is ready for this. So it's a 10-year-old seed that is just starting to grow out of the ground now. I actually just joined this about 2 hours ago, and it's an amazing platform. I think it's like what I've been waiting for to connect with people on. So I guess what I'm trying to say is the seed stage, especially these days when people are acting a little bit more, what happened was I got broken. I started a fashion and lifestyle magazine when I was a teenager, and nobody was really online yet, and it kind of took off, and I lived in that world for a little bit. And I was talking to a friend of mine, and this guy comes over, and he's like popping this $30,000 magnum of champagne and just partying and celebrating, and a room full of models and all that. And he was like, "Oh man, we just took over. We just celebrating. We just took over the Congo. $13 trillion in untapped resources." Da, 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 da. I was just like, "Oh my God!" Like my heart sank. I've always been connected to the Congo, and it's literally running our world right now, and the reason why we're here on this phone. And after that, you know, like nothing else really mattered. I just didn't really care about anything. So I wanted to use the power of media to drive people into action. You know, media is programming, and then create this like hub where people can come together and exchange resources and like gamify like the giving process and come together. So so yeah, I'm like reawakening this seed, but I wanted to share this and also remind you of that seed stage and how ideas come to us and how it's more than that. It's a soul spark. And yeah, I'm sure there's other people here that might feel that as well. But thank you for letting me communicate.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think it's interesting when you hear these ideas, they come up from time to time that somebody had it and then years went by, or in your case, almost an entire decade went by. But there was something about that idea that was so compelling to you. Were you holding on to it throughout the decade? Would it pop back into your head from time to time, or was it
Every
more
single
just
day,
20? Like,
every single day.
yeah,
It's such a big idea and such a big concept that uh, it was just like, wow, like how did we make this happen? And it's called co-create, and the only way it's going to happen is if like it's truly co-created from like this moment right now, like these moments right now, like, you know, where we all start talking, and it's a giant collaboration. That is like the mission of the project. So like it's happening, but yeah, it never left me, not for one moment. And I realize now that like if this were a container where $1 billion worth of assets has to move through it, like everything that's happened to me personally in the past 10 years has prepared me to humbly hold that and just like, cool, let's do it, you know, like just no attachment, let's, for the right reasons. So I truly believe in timing is everything at the same time. And like as we're bringing and stewarding these ideas into the world, you know, it's just, we can't always force them. And like I said, it took 2020 to be like, oh yes, the world is ready. Like we can have these big discussions. We can talk about like remodeling social structures and, you know, just kind of go in. So yeah, yeah, I trust the timing, but yeah, it never left me. And that's how I know I had to do it. I have to at least voice it and talk about it and see what happens, you know?
yeah, that's amazing. Thanks for sharing. And I think that's it's worth looking at the distinction between startups that are created on, you know, in this case, you had something that you've been passionate about for over a decade. And then we also see startups where someone was like, yeah, I wanted to be a startup person. And I looked at the market and I saw an opportunity and I went for it. And, you know, these different approaches work, but I think there's a real value added when the founder cares so passionately. If nothing else, it just gets you to work on the idea long enough to give it a good chance of success. And in the case where it's a more opportunistic approach, you know, maybe they'll have just as good a chance of making the startup succeed in terms of their ability. But when we get to the harder parts, the more traumatic parts of building any startup, are you going to be able to stick around for it? It sounds like in your case, you know, this is an anchor that would keep you going even through the tough parts.
Yeah, totally. And right before it came through, I was trying to do exactly what you said. I was like, I wanted to launch a new internet browser and an experience of a browser and things like that, and just kind of going for that, like, oh cool, we could play the game, we could like go public, and then like when thankfully that moment cracked me and snapped me back into reality. And also too, like the saying, like your dreams, anything is possible, your dreams come true, so now what? So when I like played out the scenarios, cool, what does it look like as some like, you know, tech venture, like it's all VC funding and this and that. All right, cool, you know, but then what does this look like with the potential of like what it can do in the world? Like that was a no-brainer to like transition. So just thinking through the things we think we want is also really important to kind of hone in. Thank you for the space. I appreciate it.
That was amazing, guys. This is TK, by the way, Jacob. I've been listening to you guys. uh, everybody got their own story, and it's amazing like you guys have gone, how you guys have done things and gone through the struggles and challenges, all of this. Excuse my background noise. I guess what I'm trying to say is like um, the energy and passion, basically what goes behind it. And a little bit about myself. I came to this country back in 2006. I grew up in a third world country called Bangladesh. You guys probably heard about it. I had limited access to technology. I had limited access to this kind of world that I live in right now, right? I grew up with back when I was 8. I had a pre-computer thing from VTech. I learned basic programming, and all of this. We developed some cool games, but that time internet was not accessible. And of course, like the opportunity and privilege that what people used to get by living in first world country versus a third world country, it's tremendous. It's huge. The difference is huge. So I'm glad that now anybody in India or in Bangladesh or in a third world country, they get the opportunity and they get the access to this communication highway called internet. They can get the exposure, and so many talented people are coming out of those countries. So many VCs are going there and investing into those ideas, those startups. And it's just since internet happened, globalization started happening, right? Everything's sort of becoming one world kind of scenario, though, we'll have our differences living the benefit of doubt of living in the United States or living in other countries. But I guess what I'm trying to say is like, the opportunity, of opportunity, when you get the right opportunity to do things the way you want it to do, it's also many times it's also fate can drive you or block you. Of course,
Can you
like
tell us a little bit about Dojo It? I'm curious, like what was going on when you had the original idea. I see in your bio you have a visual workspace company called Dojo It.
yes, thanks for asking that question, Jacob. So it started right after COVID started, right? So that changed the world entirely. We started working from home. Everything became different, right? Still now, till now it's different. And hopefully, we're trying to see the end of the tunnel, but the reality is might gonna be different than what it seems like. We're still positive. Anyway, so the enterprise world and the learning space, it kind of evolved and changed in last year, from since 2020. And I came up with this idea of a better whiteboarding where multiple people can collaborate, they can interact and communicate. All this time we talk about screen share and video calls that definitely boosted some productivity, but also reduced the innovation. So of course, I found that niche. Even before that, I tried a few different ideas, but like right after COVID, I found that niche. I'm pursuing that. But when you guys shared about the pain and things that we go through, it's really emotional journey for everybody who are engaging themselves into their own ideas. It's like you work 16 hours a day, trying to talk to people, trying to manage developers, and of course trying to reduce the cost, do self-funding. That's what we are at right now. I'm at right now, where we have an offshore team where we have a great team, but it's definitely how we're investing the energy, and it's an emotional toll, but still we want to see the hope, the something will happen, right? Something that I can contribute to change the world or contribute to this world. That's the vision. And of course, like the challenge is like how this can be a self-sustaining company, getting some seed funding. Of course, these are all typical way of doing things. But and I'm here not to I'm not expecting anybody to talk about ideas or fun ideas. I'm not looking to connect anybody to kind of from a VC perspective, but I'm just sharing my emotional journey into it. Yeah, Jacob.
Yeah, thank you. Naveen, we haven't heard from you yet.
Howdy. How are you?
Good.
Thanks
How's
for
it going?
having me. Good. Yeah, so I just saw the topic of the room, and so I have a couple little frameworks that I've developed for coming up with startup ideas. So through my various journeys, and these are like constraints similar to like the constraint of a tweet. So for just me, for whatever that's worth. So I try to come up with things that don't require anyone else's IP. And Erik knows that I come from the music business, so there's a lot of rationale for that.
Ooh, yeah.
Because the music business is a pain in the ass when it comes to anything related to IP. And I also have a strong aversion to building what I call gun to the head businesses. So a great example of a gun to the head business is Spotify. Like, Spotify's incredible, but I honestly don't think, at least in music, they will be able to make any money. And the reason is because every time their IP agreements come up for renewal, the rights owners are just going to keep up in the ante, right? Like that just makes sense. And it's sort of like this giant game of chicken. That's number one, like part of the framework. Second thing is build something that doesn't require anyone else's platform. So I built a very early game on Facebook back when Facebook allowed incentivized invites. And the game grew really, really fast because we were able to spam the social graph. And then, of course, Facebook turned it off. And, then the game died because it really relied on that. And we realized we're like, oh, man, probably not smart to build things that require other people's platforms because you're never going to have alignment with the underlying platform. And as a result, you always run the risk of death. So another framework is build something that you can spend like relatively little on distribution to validate product market fit. So, I always try to give myself small budgets. Like, okay, can I spend like, I don't know, a couple $1,000s and just ascertain whether people are willing to pay for the product? And so that just really comes down to, like how you tell the story and how you nurture leads and all of those things. And then another one that's really, really important to me personally is I try to build things that fit my personal ideology. So for me, I'm totally like pro privacy and I'm pro internet freedom. And I care a lot about these things. And so at this point in my career, I don't really care about making a fast buck. I care about actually making a sandcastle that's going to sustain for some meaningful period of time and actually hopefully make some positive impact. And to me, positive impact in this case could be like things that are related to privacy and, and internet freedom. And then the final thing that I'll say is this really, really important is build something that is aligned with users. So, I'll give you an example. Advertising businesses are essentially never aligned with their users. Like Facebook and Twitter, and I mean, they're just never, ever, ever aligned with their users because they're always going to do things to serve their customer at the expense of their users. And I just think that's always like a tricky pickle, right? Like it always places you in a relatively low integrity situation. And I want to do things in my life that make my energy level go up. And I never want to be in that sort of a scenario where I'm operating in a low integrity way. And so so I always want to think about, okay, who is my real user? Who is my real customer? Who's actually paying me in, as a startup? And then, how do I maximize my alignment of interest with that party? And the more I can do that, then the happier I'm going to be, and the more fulfilling the whole journey is going to be for me and the whole team. And then the final thing is, from an investor standpoint, the thing that I really pay attention to is, and everyone on stage knows this, but being a founder is all about delayed gratification. Like, there is no, I mean, people get lucky and you can have something that blows up and everyone does really well really fast, but that's far from the norm. That's a lottery ticket. And so the actual most common path is something that just takes a really, really long time and requires maybe perhaps one or two troughs of sorrow and, lots of challenges along the way. So is this something that I'm willing to, really work on for a meaningful number of years and in delay gratification, because that's a mission critical part of the startup journey. So these are the frameworks that I personally use when I'm coming up with new startup ideas, and I find them to be super duper helpful.
That's awesome. I feel like the first two that you were referring to of not building the business on someone else's IP, and then also not building on someone else's platform, I think those are two risks that are pretty understated. I've seen so many startups over the years that, we were talking about Craigslist earlier. I've probably heard 12 startup ideas where the whole premise involved having unfettered access to Craigslist data and scraping it. And they shut those things down. So you might have a really genius idea and everyone you talk to would agree it would be fantastic if this idea existed. But the only problem is that the company whose existence you are premised on is not going to allow that. And I think this is especially true, as you say, in music. I mean, at this point, I think I've had 3 or 4 music startups fail because I wasn't able to navigate the right situation. For anybody who's unfamiliar with the music industry, every song that you listen to invokes 2 entirely different types of copyright. There's the copyright of the recording, that's called the masters, and then there's the copyright of the lyrics, the melody, the sort of underlying music. And if you want to have a Spotify or any service that's doing anything with the major label music, you're going to need to get deals not only with the 3 major labels, but the 3 major publishing companies as well. And any one of those parties can hold up any deal and make it really hard for you to get the basic music library that you would need to succeed. So that's one recommendation I have, is don't do a music startup unless you have it's incredibly well funded and you're incredibly well connected. If you think that you're going to be able to just put your favorite songs in there and it's not going to come back to bite you, you're wrong. And it's definitely part of a larger picture of people building stuff without having the full rights and the full freedom to use the things that they depend on. I think we really want to spot those things when we see them and warn entrepreneurs about that risk, because it's one of those things where you might not realize what a soft foundation you built the startup on until it starts coming back to bite you as you're getting popular.
Can I say something on that, Jacob? Sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Nevin.
Sorry, I was just saying that just to talk about something that's in a similar vein. One thing that I've been wondering is not just about how to come up with startup ideas, but how to validate them. We talked about Naveen talked about work on startups that have low friction, less competitors. Whatever you're passionate about, and there are different constraints around it. But let's say you come up with a startup idea. How do you validate that? One of the things that there are numerous books written around it. Christensen talks about whether work on an idea that only some amount of people like. Do not focus on coming up with an idea that millions of users would like. Of course, if you do, cool, but focus on building something that small community of people like, and then take it from there. But someone mentioned it earlier, an example of toe laser. I think, Jennifer, it was you. that is an idea that small community of people liked. How can one validate whether that's a good idea or not? And I want to cater my question to specifically hardware slash luxury space. Like, you can come up with MVP to validate and show that MVP to certain kinds of users and say whether it works or not. But I'm pretty sure toll laser might not be super complex, but Peloton, for example, is something that MVP for it would have been expensive to build. So how do you validate ideas in general, and how do you validate ideas in the luxury slash hardware space?
Jake, I once
Luxury hardware like Peloton, or luxury slash hardware?
Luxury slash hardware.
I can share a framework that I use for anything that's related to physical products. Would that be helpful?
That'd be awesome.
So what I usually do with physical products is, the first thing is to determine sort of like what's the essence of the product and what's the story behind the product, because people don't really just buy widgets, they buy stories. So the first thing is like understand sort of the value prop of the product. And then usually what I'll do is I'll create like a landing page of some kind, and sort of that describes the value prop of the product, and ask people to sign up for some kind of a wait list. And then I'll run a relatively small budget set of ads against that lander to validate, what's the cost to acquire a user just for this like lead nurturing exercise. And what I'll usually do is I'll offer something for free to the user base, not a discount on the product, but information like knowledge related to some key learning that I have about the product. So if it's an exercise product, I don't know why Peloton came up, but if it's an exercise product, I'll say something. I'll offer some kind of like value add in the sort of like nurture stream in sort of like a drip sequence that people would actually really want to read and actually really want to learn about. And then what I'll do is I'll use the opportunity to build a relationship with those users and try to essentially create the spark of a community around the product. And then at the end state, the best thing to do, especially if you're creating some kind of physical product, and it really depends on the lead time. Like supply chain for hardware stuff is really painful, really difficult. I mean, it's really, really a challenging thing. I have a lot of respect for people who make any kind of hardware product. But if you can actually get people into a place where they're willing to pre-order the product, that's the absolute dream state, because then you can actually validate people are willing to pay money for it before you potentially even produce it. Now, the risk factor there is there's a lot. If you're not experienced building hardware products, then there's tremendous risk, because you don't want to take customer money and like use it to like build molds and build prototypes and other things that may not work the way you think they'll work in your head. So it's very important to like manage that so you don't end up in a low integrity situation. But in terms of validating, I guess the question you're asking of like validating demand for the product and validating if people are willing to spend their hard-earned money on it, that is a framework that has worked for me on many occasions.
I have, so just a little bit even more straightforward, because the detailed sequence that Naveen just laid out is definitely very well thought out. But it does also come to the end, and this is where like Indiegogo, especially for hardware companies, Indiegogos and Kickstarters and others are very helpful. And like it is, will people pay, or will people pay, right? And so pre-order campaigns, as Naveen said, is the ideal state, because you can see, will people prepay, will people not prepay? And there's still work involved in order to go and promote it, in order to go and get people, but that gives you at least an initial sense of, okay, there's some real demand, and also forces you to talk to customers and find out what are their real problems and needs. But it just depends on the thing, but you just have to go to market at a certain point and go get the feedback, and ultimately you have to see if someone's going to be willing to put their money down to know whether or not there's product market fit.
I see. I guess that makes sense. I'm in a state where I come up with ideas every other week, and I have a list of, I have a note in my Google Keeps account where I just write an idea,